I think in the Scriptures there are a handful of passages when misinterpreted could be considered the live and let live, mind your own business passages. One of them we heard last week, judge not and you shall not be judged, which, as I said last week, many misinterpret to mean never criticize or disapprove of anything anyone does ever. Another favorite mind your own business passage is found in the Gospel of John. He who is without sin cast the first stone, which means no one should cast any stones anywhere ever, because all of us are with sin, none of us are without sin. A third would be in today's gospel, in which one would say, don't tell me to remove my speck until you remove your beam from your eye. In other words, remove the wooden beam from your eye first, then leave me alone and mind your own business. But perhaps the secret is in the details of today's passage. He puts it again in a set of sayings. A blind person does not guide another blind person. Logically, a person who has sight would guide a blind person. A teacher is the one who would teach the student. Students wouldn't necessarily teach themselves, at least at a young age. And when it comes to removing the speck and removing the plank, first of all, you have to consider the person removes the plank, and it's a perspective of our own shortcomings, our own areas for growth, our own need for conversion, compared to what we might observe in someone else. But you also have to notice, he says, remove the wooden beam from your eye first, then you will see clearly to remove the splinter in your brother's eye. You remove the plank from your own eye, but you're still the one removing the splinter. It's not remove the plank and then live and let live. You remove the plank, but then you remove the splinter from your brother or sister's eye. And the brother or sister hopefully won't resist too much, because you will be holding a plank now in your hand, and that might hopefully let them know you don't want to get too much on your bad side holding a plank in your hand. But it gets a bit of a question when one removes something bigger. Does that not mean they're in a better position to remove something smaller in your eye? One who has removed a much bigger plank or wooden beam is in a much better position to remove someone else's speck. In other words, when one has overcome greater obstacles of conversion, of self-discipline, of overcoming sin and one's shortcomings, can perhaps have a better sense of compassion and understanding in guiding someone else in overcoming their perhaps much smaller shortcomings, sinful behavior, need for conversion. I mean, after all, isn't that the model of such programs as Alcoholics Anonymous? I suppose anyone who's ever overcome addiction knows the difficulty in overcoming something like an addiction. But what does the program entail? It entails a person going through it also having a sponsor who has gone through the same program, who has overcome the same challenge of addiction. And they act as a support, a guide, and at sometimes a coach who admonishes the person for falling short, not working hard enough, not keeping in touch, not sticking with the program. Someone who has removed the proverbial plank, now guiding someone in removing their own speck. One might even include perhaps our own practice of going to confession to a priest, a question many non-Catholics love to ask about Catholics. Why, in getting my own sins forgiven, do I have to go to another sinner? And isn't that the spirit of what we hear in today's gospel? One who has removed a plank can see clearly to help someone else remove a speck. And what's at the heart of all this is the familiarity that comes with being a community. Be it a family, he refers to brothers or sisters, or be it a community of faith, such as a parish or a small town or community. There's a familiarity in this relationship, because Jesus says, how can you say to your brother, remove the speck from your eye. He doesn't say, how can you say to the stranger on the street, remove the speck from your eye? He still refers to it as a brother or a sister, implying a very familiar connection that two people have, reminding us that we are, when all is said and done, a community of faith and a community of believers who are all in this together. None of us goes forth alone in our journey through life and our journey towards God. None of us goes through this alone in our call to conversion and our call to overcome sin and temptation. We belong to a community of faith. And there's that intimate connection that we have that's implied when Jesus says, how can you say to your brother? How can you say to your sister? How can you say to your neighbor? It implies a deep familiarity that is part of being a community of faith. And it's perhaps very appropriate that we hear this particular gospel on this Sunday prior to Ash Wednesday. As a community of faith throughout the world, we are about to enter once again into the holy season of Lent, a time of discipline, a time of penance, and a time of observance. And hopefully we are preparing to seriously enter into this holy season so that in the end, spiritually, we are in a different place than we are at the beginning of it because of the exercises we engage in, the disciplines we engage in, which with all exercise, even physical exercise, is meant to strengthen us. And in this case, strengthen us spiritually in our connection with God and in our connection with one another as a people of faith. Yes, we give up certain things for Lent, but we are not the only ones who do so. Everyone throughout the world is participating in these observances, from the regular parishioner in the parish to the Holy Father himself, assuming, of course, this year he's healthy enough to be able to engage in some of these practices. But our bishop, our priests, and the people together as a community enter into and engage in these practices. We have individual observances that we have, such as the individual things we give up for Lent. And we have the communal practices, the meatless Fridays and the days of fasting. I like to always tell people, when they tell me, I don't really bother with the meatless Fridays because I don't get anything out of it. And I always say, it's not about you. It's about doing something together as a community of faith during this holy season. And when you really think about it, as I always like to remind people every year, meatless Fridays and even days of fasting aren't really much of a sacrifice, especially meatless Fridays. It's not really a sacrifice. Fish sticks is a sacrifice. I was raised on those growing up, and I'll tell you, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. But observing a meatless Friday is an observance that we do together, even in the midst of doing things individually. And given that, in the spirit of today's gospel, perhaps this year, if we haven't already done it year after year, we could perhaps decide what we're going to give up for Lent. And I would say give up something with a little meat on it. No pun intended. Give up something that would be a bit of a challenge. And then tell someone about it. Let them share with you what they're giving up for Lent, what their observances are. And then hold each other accountable. Keep an eye on each other. Encourage one another. It's a great role for parents with children. I always like to encourage parents, don't wait for your children to give something up. Tell them what they're going to give up. Help them engage in that exercise. And be a community of faith as a family and as a parish as we prepare to go through these 40 days of Lent together in preparation for the 50-day celebration of Easter. These passages are not passages that remind us that we are all isolated, we need to mind our own business and not be involved in anyone else's journey. But Jesus says it involves your brother, your sister, your neighbor. And it involves remembering that we are all in this together, that we are all called to look out for each other in this journey of faith in general and in this season of Lent in particular. So let us, as we prepare to enter into Lent this Wednesday with Ash Wednesday, and I don't know about you, but compared to last year, Lent and Easter are coming much later than last year. But to me, it seems like they're rapidly approaching. It just seems to me to come out of nowhere this year. But as we prepare these days to enter into the holy season of Lent, let's do so in the spirit of today's gospel. Where as we remove the plank from our own eyes, we still have a duty, now that we see clearly, to remove the speck from someone else. Doesn't mean we become a bunch of busybodies. Look at my plank and now let me remove your speck. But that we're walking in this journey together. We are a community of faith. And we are simply exercising the communal attitudes toward one another, encouraging, admonishing, guiding each other in this journey of faith in general and this journey of Lent in particular. And in so doing, we live our lives in that spirit of these gospel passages. Not the spirit of live and let live, mind your own business, but in the spirit that is appropriate to a community of faith in dealing with our brothers, our sisters, and our neighbors. And that we are a community of faith. We are all in this together. And we encourage and walk together as appropriate for a community of brothers and sisters and neighbors.